My phone started vibrating across the metal nightstand before I was fully awake. The screen showed Clara's name. I grabbed it on the second ring. Sarah. That was all she said at first. One word. Then I heard one of the babies crying. Not fussing, not whining. The kind of cry that comes from a baby who feels terrible and doesn't understand why. I sat up immediately. Clara, what's wrong? Her breathing was shaky. I left him. I swung my legs off the bed. What happened? He brought her into the house. I closed my eyes for a second. 3 weeks earlier, Clara had told me she suspected her husband was cheating. She'd found restaurant charges for $217.48 at places he never took her. Late-night text notifications. Excuses that changed every time she asked questions. Apparently, he had finally stopped pretending. The boys are sick, she said. Another cry echoed through the phone, then another. Twins, 6 months old, double the diapers, double the bottles, double the panic when something went wrong. How sick? The thermometer said 103. That got me moving, fast. I stood and started pulling on jeans. Where are you? There was a long pause. Then she said something that made me stop. Mom and Dad's house. I looked at the clock. 12:34 a.m. You made it there? Yes. Another pause. They won't let me in. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood her. What do you mean they won't let you in? The door is locked. I waited for the punchline. It never came. I've been sitting outside for almost 40 minutes. The rain hammered against my barracks window. Hard enough to sound like gravel. They know you're there? Mom looked through the front window. My jaw tightened. And? She turned off the porch light. Silence filled the call. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. I grabbed my keys. Stay in the car, Sarah. Stay in the car. I was already moving. The drive from my military quarters to my parents' neighborhood normally took 2 hours and 45 minutes. That night it took 3 hours and 12. The rain was brutal. Visibility dropped so low that several stretches of highway looked like someone had thrown a gray blanket over the road. I stopped once for gas. While the pump ran, I called Clara again. One twin had fallen asleep. The other was still crying. She sounded exhausted. Not dramatic, not angry. Just worn down. Like someone carrying weight that should have been shared by 5 people. I knew that feeling. My parents lived in one of those neighborhoods where every mailbox matched and every lawn looked professionally managed. The kind of place where people cared more about appearances than reality. Arthur Jenkins had spent 30 years building a reputation. Retired judge, community leader, charity board member. The man practically collected awards. My mother treated neighborhood gossip the way intelligence officers treat classified reports. Information was currency. Image was everything. I turned onto their street. Clara's car was easy to spot. The engine was still running. The exhaust drifted into the darkness. I parked behind her. The second I opened my door, cold rain soaked through my jacket. Clara looked awful. Her eyes were red. Her hair was a mess. The babies were strapped into their car seats in the back. One look told me something wasn't right. I touched the forehead of the first twin. Hot, way too hot. Then the second, same thing. I pulled out the digital thermometer from my emergency bag. The reading flashed. 103.1. The second baby registered 102.9. My stomach dropped. Why didn't you go to the hospital? I didn't know what to do. She looked toward the mansion. I thought family would help. That sentence hit harder than the weather. I looked at the house. 3 stories, stone exterior, huge glass entrance, warm lights glowing inside. You could probably fit my entire apartment into their foyer. The people inside weren't struggling. They weren't asleep. They weren't unaware. They had made a choice. I walked toward the front door. My boots splashed through puddles. The security camera above the entrance followed my movement. I knew because the small blue indicator light shifted. Good, let it watch. I stopped outside the glass. My father appeared inside a few seconds later. Perfect timing. Like he had been monitoring the cameras. He looked directly at me. I looked directly at him. Neither of us moved. Then his phone appeared in his hand. Mine buzzed. A text message. From Arthur. I opened it. 7 seconds later, I wished I hadn't. She embarrassed this family by leaving her husband. Leave those babies outside until she learns respect. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The rain pounded against the glass. Takes the babies were sick. His daughter was desperate. And that was his decision. Not concern. Not help. Punishment. I slowly lifted my eyes. Arthur was still standing there, watching, waiting. Maybe expecting me to argue. Maybe expecting me to beg. maybe expecting me to play the role I had played my entire life. The fixer, the problem solver, the daughter who cleaned up everyone's mess. Not tonight. I stared directly into the security camera, long enough for whoever reviewed the footage later to know exactly where I was looking. Then I turned around. No shouting, no pounding on the door, no scene. I walked back through the rain. Clara saw my face and immediately knew. What did he say? I opened the rear passenger door. "We're going to the ER," she stared at me. "Sarah, we're going to the ER." I secured one car seat, then the other. The mansion lights remained warm behind us. The people inside stayed dry. The people outside handled the crisis. That told me everything I needed to know. As I pulled away from the driveway, I glanced once in the rearview mirror, not at the house, at the twins. Their little faces were flushed with fever. Their future mattered more than my father's pride. That was the moment something permanent broke, not the relationship, not the illusion. Those had been cracking for years. What broke was my willingness to protect people who refused to protect their own family. Have you ever watched someone choose their reputation over a child who needed help? Tell me in the comments below. And if you enjoy powerful family stories with real lessons about courage, dignity, and standing your ground, remember our exclusive stories premiere every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Join us daily, and I'll see you at the next premiere. The automatic ER doors slid open and warm air hit us after 3 hours of rain and one lifetime of disappointment. A nurse took one look at the twins and immediately called for pediatric triage. That was the first piece of good news we'd had all night. No forms first, no waiting room lecture, no please take a seat. Just movement. Fast movement. The boys were carried through a set of double doors while Clara and I followed behind. One nurse clipped tiny pulse monitors onto their feet. Another checked temperatures. A pediatric resident asked questions while typing so quickly I could barely follow the screen. How long had they been sick? When was their last bottle? Any vomiting? Any medication? At 4:11 a.m., both babies received treatment to reduce the fever. By 5:02, their temperatures had started coming down. By 5:37, the resident finally looked at us and said words I hadn't realized I was waiting to hear. "They're going to be okay." I felt my shoulders loosen for the first time all night. Just a little. The boys fell asleep shortly afterward. The room became quiet except for the occasional beep from a monitor. Clara sat beside one crib. I sat beside the other. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then she started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to tell me she'd been holding it in for hours. "This is my fault." I looked over. No, I should have left sooner. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. I knew he was getting worse. She wiped her face. I kept making excuses. I understood exactly what she meant. People always imagine bad relationships like car crashes. Loud, obvious, impossible to miss. Most of the time they're more like slow leaks. You don't notice the damage until half the tank is gone. Clara. She shook her head. "I brought my babies into this. No, I chose him. No." She finally looked at me. I leaned forward. He cheated. She looked away. He lied. Her hands tightened around a paper coffee cup. "He isolated you from friends." Silence. "He made you think every problem was your fault." More silence. "The only person responsible for that mess is the guy who created it." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Progress. Around 6:20 a.m., a nurse brought us stale muffins and coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through an old boot. I ate mine anyway. Military life lowers your standards in surprising ways. The boys were sleeping peacefully. Clara was finally calming down. The worst part of the night seemed behind us. Then my phone buzzed. I checked the screen. Arthur. Of course, not a text, a call. I stepped into the hallway and answered. "Morning, Dad." No greeting, no concern, no question about the twins, no question about Clara, nothing remotely normal. Instead, his first sentence was, "Tell your sister to go home." I stared at a vending machine full of overpriced snacks. "You mean you're home?" "No." His voice was sharp. "Her husband's home." There it was. The real priority, safety, not health, appearance. Always appearance. That's not happening. A long pause followed. I could practically hear his jaw tightening. "Do you understand what people are saying?" I laughed, actually laughed. Because after everything that had happened, that was his concern. People. One of the boys had 103 fever. I am discussing something more important. That sentence told me everything. I leaned against the wall. "No, you're discussing something more embarrassing." His voice dropped, dangerously calm. The family has a reputation. Congratulations. Sarah, you locked sick babies outside. That is not what happened. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. The man could rewrite reality faster than most lawyers rewrote contracts. Clara abandoned her marriage. She left a cheating husband. Marriage requires sacrifice. I looked toward the room where the twins slept. Funny. What? Because the only people sacrificing anything right now are Clara and those kids. Silence, then came the threat. Not shouted, not emotional, just delivered like a business transaction. If she refuses to return, I will take appropriate steps. That got my attention. What steps? Legal steps. My military training had taught me something useful. Whenever someone says something vague, make them define it. What legal steps? Another pause. Then Arthur decided to show his cards. I still know people. There it was, the retired judge talking, the man who spent 30 years collecting favors. I can make a call to Child Protective Services. My expression didn't change. Inside, though, alarms were going off. You'd report your own daughter? If necessary. I waited, he continued, an unstable woman with no permanent residence. My grip tightened around the phone. She's staying with me. An army apartment is not a suitable environment for infants. That was nonsense. He knew it. I knew it. But facts weren't the point, pressure was. If CPS receives concerns, he continued, they may decide temporary placement is necessary. There it was, the actual threat. Take the children. The hallway suddenly felt colder. Not because I believed he'd win, because I believed he'd try. Some people use power to solve problems. Arthur used power to create leverage. I lowered the phone slightly, opened an app, pressed one button, record. Then I lifted the phone back to my ear. The conversation changed immediately. Not for him, for me. This was no longer a family argument, this was evidence. When exactly are you threatening to call CPS? His voice hardened. I'm advising you to surrender the children. I'm advising your sister to act responsibly. And if she doesn't? The answer came quickly. Then consequences follow. I let him keep talking. Every sentence, every implication, every threat wrapped in polite language. People like Arthur loved polite language. It helped them pretend cruelty was professionalism. When he finally stopped, I spoke, calmly. No anger, no yelling, no drama. That's not going to happen. You don't have the authority to decide that. Actually, Dad, neither do you. The silence on the other end lasted nearly 5 seconds. A lifetime in lawyer time. Then he disconnected. Just like that. I stood alone in the hallway holding my phone. The recording timer continued counting upward. Back inside the room, Clara looked up. She immediately saw something had changed. What happened? I glanced at the sleeping twins, then at my sister, then at the recording still running on my screen. My father had finally made a mistake, and unlike the rainstorm, this one's came with a timestamp. I spent the next 4 days building routines. Not plans, not strategies, routines. Because babies didn't care about family wars, they cared about bottles, diapers, medicines, schedules, and whether someone showed up every 3 hours when they needed something. The twins had improved dramatically since the hospital visit. Their fevers were gone. Their energy was coming back. One of them had discovered the fascinating scientific properties of throwing pacifiers onto the floor every 12 seconds. The other had developed a personal grudge against naps. Recovery looked a lot louder than I expected. My apartment wasn't designed for 4 people, especially not 2 adults and 2 infants. The living room contained portable cribs. Formula containers occupied half the kitchen counter. Baby blankets appeared in places that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Somehow one ended up inside my gym bag. I still haven't figured that out. Clara sat at the kitchen table most mornings while the boys slept. Sometimes she searched for apartments. Sometimes she updated her resume. Sometimes she just stared at her coffee. Healing isn't a straight line. Anyone who says otherwise has never watched someone rebuild their life. By Thursday afternoon, things almost felt normal. Almost. Then somebody knocked on my door, 3 sharp taps. Confident. Deliberate. Not a delivery driver. Not a neighbor. I looked through the peephole. Marcus. Of course. The golden boy had arrived. He stood outside wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect timing. I opened the door halfway. What do you want? His smile widened. Nice to see you too, Sarah. No, it isn't. That actually made him laugh. Marcus had always treated life like a courtroom. Every conversation was an argument. Every relationship was a negotiation. Every person was either useful or in the way. Can I come in? No. He glanced past me. I'm here to help Clara. Funny. His smile remained. I thought you'd appreciate a civil conversation. I stepped aside. Not because I trusted him, because I wanted to hear what he had been sent to say. He entered carrying a leather portfolio. The kind lawyers use when they want everyone to know they're lawyers. Clara looked up from the kitchen table. The second she saw him, her shoulders tensed. Marcus noticed. He pretended not to. That was one of his favorite skills. Ignoring obvious things. Clara, Marcus. He sat down without being invited. Then placed the portfolio on the table. I stayed standing. Something told me this wasn't a family visit. I was right. He opened the folder, pulled out several pages, and slid them across the table, slowly. Like a magician revealing a trick. What is this? Clara asked. Marcus folded his hands. A temporary custody agreement. The room became very quiet. I looked at the paperwork. Family court, emergency guardianship framework, temporary placement recommendation. Legal language designed to sound harmless. The paperwork equivalent of poison hidden inside a vitamin bottle. Clara stared at him. What? Marcus adopted his practiced sympathetic expression. The one he used when preparing to say something awful. For the good of everyone, there it was. The phrase people use when they mean the opposite. The boys need stability. They have stability. You don't have permanent housing. I'm staying here. His eyes shifted toward me. Temporarily, I almost laughed. The man felled clients 500 fits an hour and still couldn't recognize a losing argument. Marcus continued. Our parents are prepared to provide financial support, translation, control, sign the agreement. No. The answer came immediately. Marcus blinked. Apparently, he expected hesitation, not refusal. No. Clara pushed the papers away. Marcus sighed dramatically. Like we were being unreasonable. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I finally sat down, across from him. Explain something. He turned toward me. Sure. If the boys are safe, healthy, and with their mother, I tapped the paperwork. Why does Dad want custody? Marcus didn't answer immediately. That told me enough. Then he tried anyway. That's not what this is. Then what is it? It's protection. I nodded slowly. Protection from who? Silence. Interesting. Very interesting. Marcus shifted gears. The way lawyers do when facts stop helping. You know what concerns me? No, your military career. There it was. The real reason he came. Not custody. Pressure. I leaned back. Should it? He crossed one leg over the other. Our father still knows people. I almost rolled my eyes. That line again. Arthur's favorite bedtime story. He may feel obligated to contact your command. About what? Marcus shrugged. Harboring domestic instability. I stared at him. He actually said it with a straight face. Impressive. Domestic instability. Your sister abandoned her marriage. She escaped a cheating husband. That isn't how the report may read. Now we were getting somewhere. Threats always reveal themselves eventually, Marcus continued. Commanding officers don't enjoy controversy. I remembered something from military intelligence training. When somebody starts speaking in vague language, they're usually hiding weak facts. So as I forced him to be specific. What exactly would Dad report? Marcus smiled. The wrong move, because confidence makes people careless. A potentially unstable environment involving minors. Anything else? Interference with family reconciliation efforts. I stared at him. Then I opened a drawer, pulled out a legal notepad, and started writing. Marcus frowned. What are you doing? Taking notes. His smile faded slightly. Good. I continued writing. What? Keep talking. The room felt different now. Marcus sensed it, too. I watched him carefully. The same way I analyzed supply chain disruptions overseas. People leave patterns. Threats leave patterns too. You understand there could be consequences. I nodded. Excellent. Then I read from my notes. Attempting to obtain compliance through threats of professional harm. Marcus blinked. What? I continued. Coercive pressure involving child custody. His expression hardened. Sarah, I wasn't finished. Potential extortion implications under state law depending on intent and documentation. Now he looked annoyed. Good. I slid the unsigned custody agreement back across the table. Right into his hands. Take your paperwork. You're making a mistake. No. I stood. You made a mistake. Marcus rose slowly. You're overreacting. I walked to the front door. No. I opened it. I'm documenting. The hallway suddenly seemed very interesting to him. Lawyers hate documentation when somebody else is doing it. He tucked the papers back into his portfolio. His confidence wasn't completely gone, but it had dents. Small ones. As he stepped outside, he paused. This isn't over. I nodded. I know. Then I locked the door. The deadbolt clicked into place. Simple sound, big meaning. Because for the first time, the war wasn't happening somewhere else. Not at my parents' mansion, not over the phone, not through text messages. Arthur had finally sent his people into my home, and now I knew exactly how far he was willing to go. I stood at the window for a long time after Marcus left. Not because I was angry. Anger was easy. This was different. I was calculating. Military logistics teaches you something most people never learn. A threat isn't the attack. The threat is the warning that the attack has already been planned. Marcus hadn't shown up to negotiate. He'd shown up because somebody believed paperwork was already moving somewhere. The question wasn't if Arthur would strike. The question was where and when. The answer arrived at 6:43 the next morning. I was feeding one of the twins while Clara tried to convince the other that sleep was not a personal insult. My phone displayed a name I hadn't called in almost 3 years. Diana Rostova, former military JAG, current civilian attorney. One of the most intimidating human beings ever created. Diana was the kind of person who could make a room full of lawyers suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. She answered on the second ring. Somebody finally got themselves into trouble. That was her greeting. Not hello, not good morning, just trouble. I smiled despite myself. Good to hear your personality survived retirement. It got worse. I noticed. Talk. So I did. I gave her everything. The hospital, the recordings, the document, the threats, the CPS conversation, Marcus's visit. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was silence. Then one sentence. Send me every file you have. No hesitation. No sympathy speech. No dramatic outrage. Just action. That was why I called her. By noon, my dining table looked less like a kitchen and more like an operations center. Medical reports from the ER, prescription records, temperature readings, screenshots, phone logs, photos, digital backups, printed backups, redundant backups. Military habits die hard. I created folders, then subfolders, then backups of the folders. If Arthur wanted a fight, I wasn't going to lose because of organization. Clara watched me work. You've done this before. Not exactly. The twins were sleeping nearby. I highlighted another document. But I've spent 10 years planning for people who thought they were smarter than they actually were. That earned a small laugh. Progress. Every few hours, Diana called. Each conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. She worked fast. I worked faster. Together we started assembling a timeline. The night at the mansion, the hospital intake records, the fever documentation, Arthur's text, the recorded phone call, Marcus's custody proposal, every event, every timestamp, every witness. Facts don't care about family reputations. Facts just sit there waiting to be discovered. Around mid-afternoon, Diana called again. This time her voice sounded different, not worried. Focused, which was worse. I asked, you need to answer a question. Okay, do your parents have security cameras on their street? I blinked. Probably. Find out. The call ended. Typical Diana. I spent the next hour making calls. Homeowners Association, Property Management Office, a private security contractor whose receptionist sounded deeply confused about why a military officer was asking about camera retention policies. Eventually I found what Diana wanted. The neighborhood entrance camera, vehicle logs, time-stamped footage, a record showing Clara's car entering, a record showing it never left. Hours. She sat there for hours, exactly where she said she did. Evidence. Beautiful evidence. By early evening, Diana had obtained copies. The timeline became stronger, the case became cleaner. Arthur's version of events became weaker. Then my phone rang again. Diana. I answered immediately. She skipped greetings. Where are you? My apartment. Stay available. Something in her voice made me stand up. What happened? Then I found them. Found who? Not found what? Them, Arthur and Marcus. My stomach tightened. What did they do? They filed. The room suddenly felt smaller. What did they file? Emergency ex parte custody mode. I stared across the apartment. Clara was folding baby clothes, completely unaware. The twins were asleep, completely unaware. And somewhere across town, my father and brother were trying to take those children. Today, not next week, not eventually. Today, when? This afternoon. My pulse accelerated. Ex parte motions are ugly, one-sided, fast, designed for emergencies. The other party often doesn't even know they're happening until after the fact. Arthur knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't trying to win fairly. He was trying to win first. Diana continued. I got lucky. How lucky? I know the clerk who processed the filing. Now I understood. A crack. A tiny crack. But a crack. How much time do we have? The answer wasn't comforting. Not much. I checked the clock. The courthouse would close soon. Very soon. What do you need? That was enough. The next 90 minutes moved faster than some military exercises I'd participated in. Documents scanned, affidavits prepared, evidence uploaded, statements organized, timelines verified, calls made, corrections made, then more calls. At one point, I was holding a sleeping baby in one arm while emailing exhibits with the other. Parenthood by temporary assignment, military multitasking by permanent habit. Meanwhile, Diana worked another angle. A different judge. Different jurisdiction. Different courtroom. Most importantly, different influence network. Arthur spent decades building power. The problem with power is that people start believing it exists everywhere. It doesn't. There is always another office, another judge, another person who isn't impressed. At 4:47 p.m., Diana called. Where are we? Waiting. I hated waiting. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Then again, then again. Finally, at 4:58 p.m., Diana's number appeared. I answered before the first ring finished. Tell me. For the first time all day, she sounded satisfied, not happy. Diana didn't do happy, satisfied. We got it. I closed my eyes. A slow breath escaped my lungs. What exactly did we get? Protective order. I sat down. The tension I'd been carrying all day finally shifted. Not disappeared, shifted, signed. The word landed like concrete, solid, real, permanent. Diana continued. The judge approved it minutes before Arthur's motion reached review. Minutes. Just minutes. That was all. If we'd moved slower, if we'd waited, if we'd trusted good intentions instead of preparing for bad ones, the outcome could have been very different. Across the room, Clara noticed my expression. What happened? I looked at my sister, then at her sleeping sons, then at the mountain of paperwork covering my table. For the first time since the rainstorm, Arthur Jenkins had pushed against something that didn't move. His network had finally hit resistance, and somewhere in town, a man who spent decades controlling outcomes was discovering that influence isn't the same thing as immunity. The first text message arrived less than an hour after Diana secured the protective order. That told me two things. First, Arthur had already learned about it. Second, somebody was angry. The message came from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in almost 8 months. Family is being torn apart because of your selfishness. Short, efficient, wrong. By bedtime, there were 6 more. The next morning, there were 11. By the end of the week, I stopped counting. Apparently, my extended family had suddenly become very interested in events they knew absolutely nothing about. Funny how that works. Nobody had called when Clara was sitting in a car with 2 sick babies. Nobody had called from the hospital. Nobody had called to ask how the twins were doing. But the second Arthur's authority got challenged, everybody discovered their phones. Remarkable timing. One cousin accused Clara of destroying a marriage. An uncle called her immature. A family friend she'd known since high school suggested she should be grateful her husband had stayed with her after becoming a mother. That one earned a long stare from me. People really do type things they would never say out loud. Clara tried not to read them. Tried. The problem with phones is that they fit in your pocket. Pain becomes portable. Every few hours I'd catch her looking at another message, another accusation, another opinion from somebody who wasn't there. The twins continued getting healthier. The adults got worse. Then Arthur escalated again. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing apartment listings when her expression suddenly changed. She refreshed her banking app, then refreshed it again, then a third time. What? She looked up, pale. My trust account. I already knew where this was going. What about it? It's frozen. There it was. Arthur's favorite weapon. Money. Control disguised as assistance. Years earlier, our grandfather had established small trust accounts for his grandchildren. Nothing life-changing, but enough to provide stability during emergencies, enough to help someone start over, enough to matter. Arthur managed portions of the family assets. Now somehow, Clara's access had vanished. She called. No answer. She emailed. No response. A few hours later, a formal letter arrived. Not from Arthur, of course not. From an attorney. Temporary review, administrative concerns, asset protection procedures. 100 expensive words designed to hide one simple fact. Punishment. Clara folded the letter, then unfolded it, then folded it again. I could practically hear the pressure building inside her. Not explosive pressure, worse. Slow pressure, the kind that wears people down. Day after day, message after message, problem after problem. The boys needed diapers, formula, medicine, a future. And every time Clara tried taking a step forward, somebody pushed back. The campaign worked exactly the way Arthur intended. Not all at once, little by little, a cut here, a cut there. Nothing dramatic, just enough to exhaust somebody already carrying too much. By Friday, Clara barely slept. By Saturday, she barely ate. By Sunday, she smiled only when the twins were looking at her. I noticed. Military training teaches observation. Big problems usually announce themselves. Dangerous problems get quiet. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual. The apartment had finally settled. The twins were asleep. The television was off. The city outside had gone mostly silent. At 2:17 a.m., I heard movement, not baby movement. I sat up, listened, a zipper, then another. I got out of bed. The hallway light was off. The living room was dark, but enough moonlight filtered through the blinds for me to see Clara. Standing near the front door, a duffel bag, a coat, car keys. My stomach sank, not because I was surprised, because I understood immediately. "Where are you going?" She froze. For a moment she didn't answer, then she sighed. The kind of sigh people make when they're too tired to lie. "Home." "No." She nodded. "Yes." I walked closer. "No." The bag looked heavier than it probably was. She looked exhausted. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah." There it was. Not fear, not weakness. Yeah, exhaustion. Completely different thing. The strongest people break when they stop seeing an end to the pressure. "They won't stop." Her voice cracked. "They'll keep coming after you." I didn't answer. "They'll call your command." Silence. "They'll drag you into court." Silence. "They'll ruin your life." I stepped between her and the front door, physically, deliberately. She stared at me. "What are you doing?" "Blocking the exit." "Sarah, no." The apartment became very still. The twins slept in the next room. The clock on the microwave displayed 2:19. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then I said something I hadn't told anyone in years. "When I was deployed overseas, we had a convoy get stuck." She blinked. Probably not expecting a story. Neither was I. The road turned into mud after 3 days of rain. I leaned against the wall. One truck got buried almost to the axle. Clara listened quietly. The driver panicked. I remembered his face, young, scared, certain he was doomed. He kept flooring the accelerator. I smiled slightly, which only made the truck sink deeper. She looked down. I continued. The easiest option would have been abandoning it. The memory felt surprisingly clear. We had deadlines, schedules, equipment, pressure. Lots of pressure. But our team leader wouldn't allow it. Why? I looked directly at her. Because sometimes survival isn't about finding the easiest path. Silence. It's about refusing to surrender ground. The words hung between us. Simple. True. Just true. I glanced toward the twins' room. Those boys need a mother who fights for them. Her eyes filled with tears. They deserve better than this. Exactly. She looked confused. I nodded. They deserve better than this. Not a father who cheated. Not grandparents who used them as leverage. Not relatives who treated them like public relationship problems. Better. A lot better. And better wasn't waiting behind her ex-husband's front door. I stepped closer, lowered my voice. You walked away once. She swallowed hard. That was the hard part. Another tear slid down her face. Now you stay gone. The room remained quiet for a long time, then something changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but it changed. She looked at the bag, then at the door, then toward the hallway where her son slept. Slowly she set the bag down. No speech, no announcement, no grand declaration, just a choice. A real one. The kind that matters. A few seconds later, she wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time since the rainstorm, I wasn't carrying this fight alone. Arthur wanted to break her. Instead, he had done something much more dangerous. He had given her a reason to stop running, and once Clara made that decision, there was no turning back. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning between a diaper delivery and a utility bill. Heavy cream-colored cardstock, gold lettering, expensive, pointless, exactly the kind of thing my mother loved. I picked it up from the mailbox and immediately recognized Eleanor's fingerprints all over it. Not literal fingerprints, social fingerprints. The language was perfect. Too perfect. Arthur Jenkins would be honored as Citizen of the Decade at the Grand Crest Ballroom. 500 guests, business leaders, judges, council members, charity boards, local media, the entire town's self-appointed royalty. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Sarah and Clara, family belongs together during important moments. Love. Mom, I laughed so hard one of the twins looked offended. 3 months earlier, they had left those same babies outside in freezing rain. Now suddenly family belonged together. Amazing how flexible principles become when cameras are involved. Clara read the invitation later that afternoon. Her reaction was immediate. No, fair answer. Reasonable answer. Expected answer. She dropped the invitation onto the kitchen counter like it contained a contagious disease. I am absolutely not going. I didn't respond. That made her nervous. She looked at me. Why aren't you agreeing with me? I poured coffee. Because difficult conversations deserve caffeine. Because I think we should go. The silence that followed was impressive. Even the twins stopped making noise for a second. What? We should attend. Sarah. I'm serious. Her expression suggested I had suffered a head injury. Have you completely lost your mind? Possibly. That's not funny. It was a little funny. She wasn't amused. I sat across from her. The invitation isn't for us, obviously. It's for them. She frowned. I continued. Arthur doesn't want reconciliation. Then why invite us? Because the legal strategy failed. That part wasn't complicated. Arthur had tried intimidation, pressure, custody threats, financial leverage. None of it worked. Now he needed something else. Optics. The one thing he valued almost as much as control. If we show up smiling, I said, the story changes. Understanding slowly appeared on her face. He gets his image back. Exactly. The audience sees a happy family. The newspapers take pictures. The reputation survives. Simple, clean, convenient. For him, not for us. Clara stared at the invitation again, then at me, then back at the invitation. You want to go anyway. I nodded. Why? Because I was tired, not physically. Tired of reacting, tired of defending, tired of waiting for Arthur's next move. At some point you stop surviving a war, you finish it. We're not going to surrender. Her eyes narrowed. The same way they always did when she suspected I wasn't telling her everything. You already have a plan. I smiled. That answered the question. The following week became unusually busy. Not dramatic busy, careful busy, quiet busy. The best kind. I met with Diana twice. 3 times if you counted a video call that lasted 9 minutes and involved several words that would make a judge blush. Meanwhile, Clara continued rebuilding her life. She had started freelance bookkeeping work from home. Nothing glamorous, nothing flashy. But it was hers. The boys were thriving, laughing, crawling, destroying household productivity at record speed. Normal life was slowly returning, which made the upcoming gala feel even stranger. By Friday afternoon, Clara was considering backing out, again. Maybe we shouldn't go, I understood. Fear wasn't irrational. Arthur had spent decades making people uncomfortable. He was very good at it. What are you afraid of? Everything. Fair answer, the people. The attention also reasonable. My parents, very reasonable. I sat beside her. Look at me. She did. You survived your husband. A small nod. You survived our father. Another nod. You survived being abandoned when you needed help most. This time she looked away. I gently tapped the invitation. A ballroom full of rich people isn't tougher than that. The corner of her mouth twitched. Tiny victory. I'll take those. Saturday finally arrived. The Grand Crest Ballroom sat on the edge of downtown overlooking the river. Arthur specifically loved venues with chandeliers. He believed crystal automatically created credibility. Personally, I thought it mostly created expensive cleaning bills. I arrived early, very early. The parking lot was almost empty, which was exactly how I wanted it. Most guests would arrive in tuxedos and evening gowns. I didn't. I stepped out of my car wearing army dress blues, pressed, polished, every ribbon exactly where it belonged. The uniform always had an interesting effect on people. It eliminated confusion. You didn't need to explain who you were. The uniform handled introductions. Inside, staff members rushed through final preparations, audio checks, lighting adjustments, table placements, hundreds of details. The controlled chaos reminded me of deployment logistics. Same stress, better catering. I spotted the AV technician near the stage. His name was Mike, former Army, 2 tours overseas. We'd met years earlier through a veterans organization. Mike, Captain's me, immediate grinned. You look like trouble. Good. His grin widened. That bad? Worse. I handed him a small USB drive, nothing flashy, just black plastic. A few gigabytes of data, the most dangerous object in the building. Mike glanced down at it, then back at me. You sure? Very. He nodded once. No questions. Veterans develop a useful skill, knowing when not to ask. He slipped the drive into his pocket. It'll be ready. Perfect. Across the ballroom, workers adjusted spotlights over the stage where Arthur would soon receive another award. Another speech. Another round of applause. Everything was perfectly arranged. Every table. Every flower arrangement. Every place card. The illusion was ready. Guests began arriving shortly afterward. Luxury cars, designer dresses, expensive watches, influential people shaking influential hands. Meanwhile, the USB drive sat quietly inside the technician's pocket, waiting, patient, invisible. A few minutes later, Clara entered through the front doors, nervous, terrified, determined. I walked over to meet her. She looked around at the growing crowd. "Tell me this is a good idea." I glanced toward the stage, then toward the pocket holding the drive, then back at my sister. For the first time in months, Arthur believed he controlled the room. That was going to make what happened next much more memorable. "I think," I said calmly, "it's the last idea he'll ever underestimate." The first standing ovation happened before Arthur even reached the podium. 500 people, 500 sets of hands. 500 people applauding a version of my father that existed mostly in brochures. The ballroom glowed under massive crystal chandeliers. Champagne glasses clinked. Servers moved between tables carrying trays of expensive appetizers that looked too fancy to identify. The Grand Crest ballroom had spent a fortune creating elegance. Arthur spent decades creating the rest. From our table near the center of the room, Clara sat perfectly still, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. I understood. The room was packed with people who had attended our family Christmas parties. People who had praised Arthur at charity events. People who had probably repeated his version of our story without asking a single question. Nobody looked nervous, not yet. On stage, a master of ceremonies introduced Arthur Jenkins as a pillar of integrity, a champion of justice, a protector of families. That last one nearly made me laugh. Instead, I took a sip of coffee. The irony was strong enough already. Arthur approached the podium to thunderous applause. Confident, relaxed, victorious. He genuinely believed he had survived the storm. The legal pressure failed. The custody attempt failed. The smear campaign hadn't broken us. But tonight wasn't about winning. Tonight was about recovering his image. And judging by the crowd's reaction, he thought he already had. Arthur adjusted the microphone, then began speaking. The speech was exactly what I expected. Polished, practiced, professional. He talked about service, community, responsibility, the importance of sacrifice. People nodded, people smiled, people applauded. The performance was flawless. Then he started talking about family. Of course he did. Everything meaningful begins at home. Applause. Strong families create strong communities. More applause. Protecting the vulnerable is one of our highest responsibilities. The applause grew even louder. I glanced at Clara. She stared at the stage, expressionless, which somehow felt more powerful than anger. Arthur continued. "I've spent my life trying to help people." Standing ovation, another one. At a nearby table, I noticed several guests dabbing tears from their eyes. Apparently, fiction remained very popular. Then Arthur reached the final section of his speech. The section I knew was coming, the trap. "My greatest pride," he said, "has always been my family." The ballroom erupted again. Arthur smiled. The perfect father, the perfect patriarch, the perfect lie. Then he looked directly toward our table. "Showtime. I'd like to recognize my daughters tonight." Clara immediately froze. I remained seated. The crowd turned toward us. Hundreds of eyes. Hundreds of expectations. Arthur extended his arm. "Sarah." His voice echoed across the ballroom. "Would you join me on stage?" The applause started immediately. People love reunions, especially fake ones. I stood. The room grew louder. Arthur smiled wider. He thought he had won. From a distance, I probably looked exactly like the prodigal daughter returning home. That was the beauty of assumptions. People make them for you. I walked toward the stage, steady pace, no rush, no hesitation. Every step felt strangely calm. Months earlier, I would have been nervous. Now, I was simply finished. Arthur greeted me near the podium. His hand landed lightly on my shoulder. A public display. One final photograph. One final performance. He handed me the microphone. The audience waited, smiling, expecting forgiveness, expecting healing, expecting a happy ending. I looked around the ballroom, 500 people, judges, business owners, community leaders, reporters, neighbors, friends, strangers. Then I looked at my father, the man who left 2 sick babies outside, the man who threatened to take them away, the man who confused authority with character. I smiled politely, then I spoke. My father taught me a lot about protection. The room became quiet, not silent, just attentive. "Good," I continued. "And tonight I'd like to share one of those lessons." Arthur's smile remained something. Confusion. Small. Barely visible. The first crack. I turned toward the AV booth. Mike was already watching. waiting, ready. I nodded once, then returned my attention to the audience. My father taught me about protecting the vulnerable. More nodding, more smiles. They still thought this was a tribute. Then I delivered the line. Let me show you what that looks like. The ballroom lights dimmed. Immediately, Arthur turned toward the giant projection screen. His smile disappeared. The first image appeared. Black sky, heavy rain. Timestamp visible in the corner. The security footage was crystal clear. No dramatic editing, no narration, reality. Guests leaned forward, confused, curious. The video continued. Clara's vehicle, the driveway, the rain, the twins. My sister sitting alone, hour after hour. People stopped smiling. Then the next clip appeared. The front entrance. Arthur standing inside, dry, comfortable, safe. Outside, Clara held one of the babies. Guests exchanged glances. Whispers started. Then the footage showed exactly what happened. Arthur looked directly at her, reached for the door, and shut it. Hard. The ballroom became very quiet. Not attentive quiet, shock quiet. The kind of silence people create when their brains are struggling to process information. Arthur stepped toward me. Turn this off. I didn't even look at him. The video ended. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the audio began. His voice filled every speaker in the ballroom, perfectly clear, perfectly recognizable. Leave those babies outside until she learns respect. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Arthur's face drained of color. The recording continued. Help her, and I take the kids. Another wave of reactions spread through the crowd. Nobody was applauding now. Nobody was smiling. Several people physically stepped away from Arthur. Not metaphorically. Literally, chairs shifted, bodies moved, distance appeared. The social equivalent of a quarantine. Arthur reached for the microphone. Too late. The illusion had already collapsed. People weren't looking at him the same way anymore. That was the important part. Not the video, not the recording, the realization. The moment 500 people understood, they had been applauding a man who abandoned his own grandchildren in a medical emergency. You could actually see it happen. The recalculation, the disgust, the disbelief, the retreat. Arthur opened his mouth, nothing came out. For the first time in my life, my father had no control over the room. And for the first time in months, neither did I, because the truth had taken over. And once that happened, nobody could stop what came next. Nobody chased us. That was the strange part. For months, everything had been noise. Threats, phone calls, lawyers, pressure, arguments. Suddenly, there was none. Just silence. The ballroom remained frozen behind us, 500 people standing inside the wreckage of a reputation. Arthur was still on stage when I stepped down. I never heard what he tried to say afterward. Honestly, it didn't matter. The room had already made its decision. People can forgive mistakes. They struggle to forgive hypocrisy, especially when children are involved. Clara and I walked toward the exit together. Nobody stopped us. Several guests moved out of our way. A few nodded politely. One older woman reached and briefly squeezed Clara's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Sometimes silence says more than speeches. The cool night air hit us the second we stepped outside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city's lights reflected across the river. Cars moved through downtown traffic. Life continued exactly as it had before. Funny how personal disasters never interrupt the rest of the world. Clara finally laughed. A real laugh. Not nervous. Not forced. Real. Then she immediately started crying. I understood that too. Sometimes relief and exhaustion arrive at the same time. You okay? I asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed again. Reasonable response. It had been a long few months. We stood there for another minute, just breathing. No lawyers, no family politics, no strategy, no survival, just breathing. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. 3 missed calls. Arthur. I locked the screen without listening. The conversation was over, not because I hated him, not because I wanted revenge, because there was nothing left to discuss. The evidence had already spoken. The following week felt surreal. The stories spread faster than I expected. Not through newspapers, not at first, through people. The same social circles Arthur spent decades building suddenly became very interested in facts. A charity board quietly requested his resignation. Then another, then another. A civic foundation postponed an award named after him. Several organizations removed his photo from promotional materials. No announcements, no dramatic statements, just distance. Lots of distance. The kind people create when association becomes inconvenient. Eleanor tried damage control. Of course she did. That was practically her full-time job. Unfortunately, damage control only works when the damage isn't on video. Video is stubborn. Video doesn't care about reputation. Video just keeps existing. Marcus didn't fare much better. 2 weeks after the gala, I received a text from Diana. 3 words: Golden Boy fired. That was it. Classic Diana. Short, efficient, accurate. Apparently Marcus's law firm decided a lawyer connected to attempted custody manipulation, and public scandal wasn't ideal for client relations. Corporate loyalty has limits, usually financial ones. I showed Clara the text. She read it twice, then smiled into her coffee. No celebration, no gloating, just closure. Healthy people eventually stop needing revenge. They become busy building something better. The months that followed were quieter. Not perfect. Just quieter. And quiet felt amazing. Clara rented a small townhouse 15 minutes from my place. 2 bedrooms, 1 tiny office. A fenced backyard that seemed enormous to 2 growing boys. The rent wasn't cheap. The furniture didn't match. The kitchen cabinets looked older than both of us. She loved it. Because it belonged to her, not our parents, not her ex-husband. She continued working remotely. The bookkeeping business grew slowly, then steadily, then surprisingly well. One afternoon, she showed me her first quarter earnings report. I thought she was going to frame it. Honestly, she probably should have. The twins reached on new milestones almost weekly, crawling, standing, destroying household objects with impressive creativity. One of them developed an obsession with hiding television remotes. The other became fascinated by dog food despite not owning a dog. Parenthood appeared exhausting. Also hilarious. Life was moving forward, which is exactly what Arthur never understood. Control only works when people stay in place. Once they move on, the leverage disappears. One morning, several months later, I sat on my back patio holding a cup of coffee. The weather was perfect, not remarkable, just comfortable. The best kind. The twins played on a foam mat in the yard. Healthy, happy, loud, very loud. Clara sat nearby working on her laptop. Every few minutes she answered an email, then looked up to check on the boys. The routine felt natural, easy, earned. I watched them for a while without saying anything. There wasn't much to say. The legal threats were gone, the pressure was gone, the fear was gone. Not because somebody rescued us. Because we stopped surrendering. Clara noticed me smiling. What? I shook my head. Nothing. That's suspicious. Probably. She laughed. The boys immediately started laughing too, for absolutely no reason. Children are weird like that. A breeze moved through the yard. Coffee steamed gently from my mug. A perfectly ordinary morning, which made it extraordinary, because ordinary had once felt impossible. My phone still contained Arthur's number. I never blocked it. I never changed it. I never listened to the messages either. Forgiveness and access aren't the same thing. That lesson took me years to learn. People always assume stories like this end with reconciliation. A dramatic apology. A tearful reunion. Everybody hugging in a living room. Real life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the healthiest ending is distance. Sometimes accountability is the ending. Sometimes peace arrives without permission. I looked at Clara, then at the boys, then at the home she had built from almost nothing. Not inherited, not granted, built. That mattered. Because dignity isn't something powerful people hand to you. It isn't hidden inside family names. It isn't stored in trust accounts. And it definitely isn't controlled by people who mistake authority for character. Dignity survives because somebody protects it. Sometimes a mother protects it. Sometimes a sister does, sometimes both. The twins burst into laughter again as one of them toppled onto the grass. Clara shook her head and smiled. I took another sip of coffee. And for the first time in a very long time, nobody needed saving. We were finally home. The real kind, fade to black. A few months after everything settled down, I found myself thinking less about the night in the rain, and more about what happened afterward. Not the legal filings, not the gala, not even the video. What stayed with me was a much simpler question. Why had so many people expected Clara and me to keep accepting mistreatment just because it came from family? I think that's a question a lot of people struggle with. Maybe you're one of them. For most of my life, I believed family relationships work differently from every other relationship. I believed relatives automatically deserved more patience, more forgiveness, more opportunities, more access. What I eventually learned is that family and access are not the same thing. Being related to someone does not automatically give them unlimited access to your time, your peace, your children, your home, or your emotional well-being. That lesson took me 32 years to learn. And honestly, I wish I had learned it sooner. My father spent decades teaching everyone around him that family loyalty was the highest virtue. At least that's what he said. What he actually meant was obedience. There is a difference. Healthy families ask for honesty. Unhealthy families demand compliance. Healthy families respect boundaries. Unhealthy families punish them. Healthy families want you to grow. Unhealthy families want you to stay exactly where they can control you. For years, I confused those things. A lot of people do. I certainly did. Looking back, I realize Arthur rarely used force. He didn't have to. He used guilt, expectations, reputation, obligation. The tools looked respectable from the outside. That made them more dangerous. If someone screams at you, the problem is obvious. If someone manipulates you while talking about love, family, and tradition, the problem becomes harder to identify, especially when you've grown up around it. The night Clara sat outside that mansion changed something for me. Not because my parents rejected her. As painful as that was, it wasn't actually the biggest lesson. The biggest lesson was realizing they believed they were entitled to continue controlling her even after rejecting her. Think about that for a moment. They denied help, denied shelter, denied compassion, then demanded authority. That mindset appears in more families than people realize. I've received thousands of messages from people over the years through military support groups and community programs. Different names, different states, different circumstances, but the same pattern. Parents who use money as leverage, siblings who use guilt as a weapon, relatives who create chaos and then expect unlimited forgiveness, people who hurt others while insisting they should never face consequences. One thing I've noticed is that many good people stay trapped because they confuse boundaries with cruelty. Let me say something that took me years to understand. Setting a boundary is not an act of aggression. It's an act of responsibility. A boundary doesn't mean you hate someone. It doesn't mean you're bitter. It doesn't mean you're seeking revenge. It simply means you're defining what behavior you will and will not accept in your life. That's it. Nothing more. When Clara stopped answering manipulative messages, some relatives called her selfish. When she refused to return to her husband, others called her stubborn. When she chose her children over family appearances, people accused her of creating conflict. The truth was much simpler. She stopped volunteering for her own mistreatment. That's what upset people. Not her behavior, the loss of control. And that's another lesson worth remembering. Sometimes people don't get angry because you're doing something wrong. Sometimes they get angry because what you're doing no longer benefits them. Those are very different things. If you're watching this and dealing with a difficult family situation, I want you to think carefully about one question. Does this relationship bring responsibility into your life? Or does it only bring control? Because healthy relationships and controlling relationships often look similar from a distance. Up close, they're completely different. Healthy relationships allow disagreement. Control does not. Healthy relationships survive honesty. Control requires silence. Healthy relationships respect your decisions. Control punishes them. The older I get, the less impressed I am by titles. Judge, attorney, executive, community leader. None of those titles automatically make someone wise. And they definitely don't make someone kind. Character reveals itself during moments when there is no reward for doing the right thing. Nobody was watching my parents that night. There were no cameras they knew about. No reporters, no audience, just a daughter, 2 sick babies, and a choice. The choice mattered because choices always matter, especially the ones people think nobody will ever see. Today, Clara is doing well. The boys are thriving. Our lives are peaceful. Not perfect. Peaceful. And peace has become something I value more than approval. If there's one lesson I hope people take from our story, it's this. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, even when those boundaries disappoint them. People who only want access will fight every boundary you create. Learning the difference can change your entire life. It certainly changed mine. One thing surprised me after our story became public. It wasn't the number of people who talked about my father. It wasn't the number of people who talked about the gala. It wasn't even the number of people who talked about the video. What surprised me was how many people reached out to talk about Clara. Not because she exposed anyone, not because she won, because she left. Over and over again, I heard versions of the same message. I wish I had her courage. At first, I didn't know how to respond, because if you had asked Clara whether she felt courageous during those months, she probably would have laughed. Or cried. Possibly both. Most people have the wrong idea about courage. Movies have not helped. Stories have not helped. Social media definitely has not helped. We tend to imagine courage as confidence. A fearless person making bold decisions without hesitation. Someone standing tall without doubt. Someone who always knows exactly what to do. In my experience, that's not courage. That's usually fiction. I've spent most of my adult life in the military. I've worked alongside people who were asked to make difficult decisions under pressure. I've watched people step into dangerous situations when nobody would have blamed them for walking away. And I've learned something important. The bravest people I have ever met were afraid, very afraid. The difference was that fear didn't make the decision for them. That's courage. Not the absence of fear, the refusal to surrender control to it. When Clara left her husband, she wasn't fearless. She was terrified. She didn't know where she would live. She didn't know how she would support 2 babies. She didn't know how ugly the family fallout would become. She simply knew staying was worse. That distinction matters, because many people spend years waiting to feel brave before they act. Unfortunately, life rarely works that way. Most of the time, courage shows up after the decision, not before it. I think back to that night when Clara packed her bag and tried to leave my apartment. People sometimes assume that was her weakest moment. I don't see it that way. To me, it was proof of how exhausted she had become. There's a difference. Weakness is giving up because you don't care anymore. Exhaustion is wanting to keep going but feeling overwhelmed. Many good people confuse the two. They start judging themselves unfairly. They assume struggling means failing. It doesn't. Sometimes struggling means you're carrying more than one person should have to carry. Another lesson I learned from this experience is that courage often looks ordinary while it's happening. Leaving an unhealthy marriage doesn't look heroic. It looks messy. Setting boundaries with family doesn't look inspiring. It looks uncomfortable. Walking away from people who manipulate you doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels lonely. That's why so many people stay stuck. They expect courage to feel good. Often it doesn't. At least not immediately. Sometimes it feels like uncertainty. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like disappointing people you love. The rewards come later, much later. If you're watching this right now and facing a difficult decision, I want you to remember something. You do not need perfect certainty to move forward. You do not need guarantees. You do not need unanimous approval. And you definitely do not need everyone to understand your choice. One of the most dangerous traps in life is waiting for universal permission. It never arrives. There will always be somebody who disagrees. Somebody who criticizes. Somebody who thinks you should stay quiet. Somebody who benefits from you staying exactly where you are. That's why courage matters. Not because it removes obstacles, because it allows movement despite them. I've seen this happen in situations far beyond family conflict. People leaving toxic workplaces. People starting businesses after years of fear. People returning to school in their 40s and 50s. People ending unhealthy friendships. People seeking therapy. People standing up for themselves for the first time. Every one of those decisions shares something in common. The person usually feels afraid. Then they do it anyway. That's courage. And there is one more thing I want to say. A lot of people underestimate small acts of bravery. We celebrate the giant moments, the dramatic decisions, the life-changing events. But real change usually begins much earlier. It begins with one conversation, one boundary, one refusal, one honest sentence. One moment when you stop pretending everything is fine. Those small moments create bigger ones. The gala didn't change our lives. The decision Clara made in that car months earlier changed our lives. The gala was simply where the consequences finally became visible. Never underestimate the power of a small, courageous decision. You don't know what future it might create. Looking back, I don't think the strongest moment in our story happened in a ballroom. I think it happened when a frightened young mother decided she deserved better. Nobody applauded, nobody celebrated, nobody even knew it happened. But that decision changed everything that followed. And that's probably the most important lesson I can leave you with today. The biggest turning points in life often arrive quietly. Sometimes they look like a single decision, a single sentence, a single step. And sometimes courage is nothing more than deciding you will not take one more step backward. The older the twins get, the more I find myself thinking about the word home. Not the house, not the mortgage, not the address. Home. It's a word most people use every day without really stopping to think about what it means. For a long time, I thought I knew. I grew up in a large house, beautiful neighborhood, perfect landscaping, expensive furniture, holiday cards that looked like they belonged in magazines. From the outside, it checked every box: success, stability, respectability. Everything people are taught to admire. And yet, when Clara needed help the most, that house became the least safe place she could go. That realization changed the way I think about almost everything. Because a house and a home are not the same thing. A house is a structure. A home is a decision. A house is built with money. A home is built with trust. A house can be impressive. A home has to be safe. Those are completely different things. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that comfort and security come from external things. A bigger paycheck, a larger house, a better neighborhood, a more impressive family name. Those things can make life easier, but they cannot create trust. And without trust, eventually everything else starts to feel empty. When I look at Clara today, I don't see someone who escaped a bad marriage. I see someone who built a new life. Those are not the same thing. Escaping is only the beginning. Building is the hard part. Building requires patience, consistency, responsibility, and most importantly, faith that your future can be different from your past. A lot of people never take that second step. They leave unhealthy situations physically but remain trapped emotionally. They continue measuring themselves through the opinions of people who hurt them. They continue chasing approval from people who have no intention of giving it. They continue carrying old judgments into new chapters. That's a heavy way to live. One thing I've learned is that healing doesn't happen when someone finally apologizes. Healing happens when their apology is no longer necessary. That may sound harsh, but it's true. There are people who spend years waiting for closure, waiting for validation, waiting for the person who hurt them to finally admit what happened. Sometimes that moment never comes. If your peace depends on someone else's self-awareness, you're giving them far too much control. The healthier path is building a life so meaningful that their approval becomes irrelevant. That's what Clara did. She stopped waiting for our parents to become different people. She stopped trying to win arguments that could never be won. She stopped asking people to understand what they were unwilling to understand. Instead, she focused on her children, her work, her future, the things she could actually control. And little by little, her life improved, not overnight. Real life doesn't work that way. The improvement was gradual, a better routine, a little more confidence, a little more independence, a little less fear. Then one day you look back and realize you're living a completely different life. I think that's another lesson worth sharing. Don't underestimate small improvements. Social media teaches people to chase dramatic transformations. Real growth usually looks much less exciting. It's paying bills on time, keeping promises to yourself, taking care of your health, learning new skills, making better decisions repeatedly. The boring things, the unglamorous things, the things nobody applauds. That's where real change lives. If you're watching this story and going through something difficult right now, I want to offer a few pieces of practical advice. First, stop measuring your value through the opinions of people who consistently disrespect you. Their judgment is not an accurate reflection of your worth. Second, don't stay in environments where you must constantly earn basic respect. Healthy relationships do not require endless auditions. Third, don't let fear of change trap you inside situations that are already hurting you. The unknown feels scary, but so does spending years in the wrong place. And finally, pay attention to who shows up when life becomes inconvenient. Not when things are easy, not when celebrations are happening, when life gets difficult. Those people matter. Invest in those relationships. Protect those relationships. Appreciate those relationships. Because those are the people who help build a real home. Looking back, many people assume the biggest victory in our story was what happened to Arthur. It wasn't. His reputation wasn't the point. Marcus losing his job wasn't the point. The gala wasn't the point. The biggest victory happened much later. It happened on an ordinary morning. 2 healthy boys laughing in a backyard. A mother who no longer lived in fear, a future that belonged to them. That's the victory. That's always been the victory. Not revenge, freedom, not punishment, peace, not destroying someone else's life, building your own. And if there's one final lesson I hope stays with you after this story ends, it's this. Dignity is not inherited. Trust is earned. Love is proven through actions. and home is built by the people who stay when life gets hard. Thank you for spending this time with me and following this journey all the way to the end. If this story gave you something valuable, helped you see a situation differently, or reminded you of your own strength, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We share new stories every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET, each one filled with real-life lessons, powerful family dynamics, and reminders that difficult chapters do not have to define the rest of your life. Until the next story, take care of yourself, protect your peace, and keep building the life you deserve.